on camera, then please turn your cameras off. But yes, welcome. Thank you everybody for being here. It's good to see so many of you, and so some new names and some regulars as well who've come back from other sessions. As you may know, this is our third Pillars of Green Politics talk. We started off a couple of weeks ago with some of the intro to green politics, and we've had a discussion of the Green New Deal, and we've now got a fantastic discussion tonight, which will hopefully build on that further. My name's Johan. I'll be facilitating the discussion tonight and introducing you to our guest speakers shortly. We're going to have a really interesting discussion, I'm sure, tonight about two approaches to building social justice, which, as we've already seen in this series, is a key value underpinning green politics. As I'm sure we will see, both universal basic income and universal basic services can link across those key pillars that we've been talking about earlier on in this series and play a fundamental role in radically transforming our economy and society. So as I said before, so far we've discussed the development of green politics and introduced ourselves to the Green New Deal. But as we saw last week, policies to tackle environmental crises, the environmental crises we face, can exacerbate inequalities internationally, nationally, and across class divides unless there is a commitment to justice at their heart. We need to design a fair economy, one that tackles poverty and inequality and empowers groups across society. Essentially, we need to actively build social justice. So tonight we are going to hear about some approaches which can start to build resilient communities and a fair economy through the lens of a universal basic income and universal basic services. We're very fortunate to be joined by two fantastic advocates for these approaches, who will be speaking in turn, one from each perspective, and we'll then use your questions to pull these approaches apart a little further and delve into some of their strengths and weaknesses. Each speaker is going to speak for around 20 minutes or so, outlining the approach which they're here to speak about, its benefits, and why it should be an essential element of a political commitment to social justice. During the discussion, you can share any questions that you might have for the panelists directly with me via the chat. We'll be gathering the questions behind the scenes and relaying them back to the panelists after they have spoken. If your question is for one panelist in particular, or for both to react to, then please make that clear in your message. We'll try and keep the discussion tonight relatively prompt, but with both speakers and a good amount of time for questions, I expect we'll wind up around 8:15 or so. If you have any technical problems, then please message Kelsey, who has tech questions in their Zoom name, and we'll try and help sort through those with you. If you require captions during the meeting tonight, then you can switch them on by clicking on the captions icon at the bottom of the screen. We also have Jane on hand, who is one of our safeguarding officers. So if you have any questions or concerns in that regard, please send a message to her directly. Jane will also drop our safe spaces guidance in the chat. So this guidance is in place for this meeting, and we expect attendees to abide by it. So without much further ado, I'm going to introduce Guy Standing. So Guy will be speaking about a universal basic income and its potential role in creating a fair economy and society. Guy is a professorial research associate at SOAS, University of London, is a co-founder of the Basic Income Earth Network organization. He is the author of multiple books, including Basic Income and How We Can Make It Happen, of which I have my copy here, The Prokaryote and the Corruption of Capitalism, and many other books as well. Without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Guy.
Well, thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. I hope this is going to be a convivial, useful discussion. I had the good fortune to present at two of the Green Party conferences, and both times had fantastic response and reaction. So I know that the Greens, which is more important now than at any time in our history, the Greens understand basic income. So I hope that what I have to say this evening will reinforce the values that we all share. And I'm sure that applies just as much to Maeve as to anybody else, the values that we begin with. First of all, let me define what we mean by basic income, because there's a lot of mischievous talk that is based on either deliberate or simple misunderstanding of what it's all about. The idea is that every individual would receive a modest amount paid regularly, not as a capital sum, but paid monthly, paid unconditionally in the sense of both not requiring previous contributions or requiring particular behavior in order to continue to receive it. It's not only individual, but it's non-withdrawable, and it is paid regardless of work status, regardless of gender, household status, or race, or any other, or religion, or any other denominator, if you like. I don't call it a universal basic income, although everybody keeps telling me that I'm speaking about universal basic income. In my books, you'll notice I call it basic income, and I did in a report for John McDonnell, I called it basic income. And the reason is that for pragmatic reasons, one would have to say that people coming into the country would have to wait a period before they became entitled to it. If not, you're going to have tremendous political objections to moving in the direction of a basic income. And also you would have to exclude people like myself who are living and working outside the country. And that would be a necessary condition, if you like. So I don't use the term universal, but it's universalistic in the sense that it's not targeted, it's not means tested, and it's paid as a right. Now, the justification for moving in the direction of having a basic income, and I always stress moving in the direction because it will take time to build up the funding, the basis for paying a higher basic income. But the justification for moving in that direction is fundamentally ethical and moral. And it's ethical for three fundamental reasons. First and foremost, it is a matter of common justice. The income and wealth of all of us is far more to do with the efforts and achievements of the many, many generations before us. But none of us know whose ancestors contributed more or less. And if we allow the private inheritance of private wealth, then one should accept that a basic income would be like a common dividend on the collective public wealth. Now, the notion of the commons is fundamental both for Greens and for the justification of a basic income. I've written a book called Plunder of the Commons, which leads to how we would fund a decent, growing basic income. And fundamentally, we would fund it from taxing people and interests that are deducting from our commons. Our commons include our land, our water, our sea, our minerals under the earth. They belong to everybody. And this principle of common property goes back to common law of Justinian AD 534 and through the Magna Carta and the Charter of the Forests of 1217, which are the bedrocks of our constitution. And what we have seen over the generations is a deliberate taking of our commons by people who have not done anything to earn it or justify taking it, mainly through enclosure, through encroachment, through capitalist penetration, etc. Those commons belong to all of us. And we are also seeing that an encroachment in our commons in the form of deducting from what is ours collectively. And that, of course, includes the air. It includes the sea. It includes all water. And we need taxes on ecological encroachments on our commons. We need high carbon taxes. We need frequent flyer taxes. We need seabed levies, which would be put on people who are benefiting from causing the pollution or taking from our commons. But the trouble with those taxes and levies by themselves is that they are regressive. In other words, by themselves, a poor income person would be paying a high proportion of their income in eco-taxes or whatever, and it's actually the rich who are causing more of the pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, etc. It only ceases to be regressive if the revenue raised from those eco-taxes and land value tax and wealth transfer taxes and so on that I've advocated are recycled in equal payments of common dividends, because they must be paid equally. We're all commoners together. We're all equal commoners. So the first justification is a matter of common justice, but it's also a matter of work justice. Our current system and our capitalist system says the only work that counts is labor in jobs. But as we've learned during the pandemic, and we should have known that yonks ago, and I've been certainly arguing it the whole of my life, other forms of work are actually far more useful, far more ecologically sustainable, and are essential. The word essential has been creeping into discussions. And that, of course, includes unpaid work. Unpaid work is vital. It isn't compensated. And if you had a basic income, at least you would be moving in the direction of compensating forms of work that we want to encourage and actually discouraging people from focusing entirely on resource depleting labor. This is very important in terms of reorienting the way we live. But it's also important in terms of religious justice. I'm not religious, but I was very pleased when the Pope came out in favor of basic income last year on the grounds that we've been arguing in Bien, which is that if there's a God, he gives unequal talents, and the talent of making money is a minority talent, and a basic income in a sense would be a compensation to those who do not have the talent to make money and to be successful. So I think justice arguments can be extended, but it also means that we would move towards a system of social protection where we would gradually fade out means testing, targeting, behavioral conditionality, which has been taken to its extreme in the form of universal credit. I think universal credit is paternalism gone ugly. It is a real disgrace and a discredit to our social policy. We must abolish universal credit, but we must also have a plan to move away from means testing altogether, move away from behavior testing. And that leads to the second ethical justification for basic income. And that is, even if it was below the level of subsistence, below the level that I would wish it to be, if it was just a modest amount on which you could only survive in extremis, it would enhance basic security. Basic security is a human need, and it is also a public good. I'm an economist, and a public good is one in which if you have it, it doesn't deprive me of having it. A private good is the other way around. A public good, it is also a superior public good in the sense that if we all have basic security, it enhances the value for all of us. Now, one thing we should have learned during this pandemic is that some people are left insecure, the resilience of those people diminishes, resilience to disease and the effects of disease and social illnesses. And if some groups are left unresilient, all of us are left unresilient. If we want collective social resilience, then we need everybody to have basic security. The psychologists have also taught us that basic security increases the mental bandwidth. or put the other way around, insecurity diminishes the mental bandwidth. In other words, it diminishes IQ. That's been shown in numerous studies. Well, it is unfair of the state to expect people to behave socially responsibly if their mental capacities have been reduced by chronic insecurity. We have a big precariat, a vast growing precariat that's been enhanced by the pandemic and the austerity era beforehand, where millions of people are living in chronic insecurity. And it is fundamentally unjust for the state to say, you have to behave responsibly when they have had their mental capacities reduced by insecurity. Therefore, we need to have a strategy that gives people that basic security. And this, I think, is made even more important by rentier capitalism that exists today, whereby more and more of the income and wealth is going to the owners of private property, physical property, financial property, intellectual property, and less is going to those who have to rely on labor. We are living in an era of chronic uncertainty, and that induces behavior which is ecologically bad, socially bad, and economically parasitical. This cannot continue. We are in a situation of instability. And that leads to the third ethical justification. Every politician, every political party says, we favor freedom. We promote freedom. Well, in actual fact, as my book on rentier capitalism shows, we have the most unfree market system ever created. And in reality, people who are chronically insecure haven't the chance of being free because they haven't got the three types of freedom in front of them. The first freedom is what's called libertarian freedom, the freedom to say no, the freedom to choose whether you buy this or buy that or do this or do that. If you're insecure, you don't have that freedom. Saying to a woman that she can walk out of an abusive relationship when she has no financial security is a bad joke. The second type of freedom is liberal freedom. Now, liberal freedom is rather ignored, but liberal freedom means the freedom to be moral, the freedom to make a decision because I think it is right, not because I have to do so, or because some bureaucrat at the Universal Credit Office is telling me I must do this, or some landlord is saying that, or some parent is saying that, or some partner is saying that, but because I believe it is the right thing to do. And you can only have liberal freedom if you have access to the resources to be able to make such a decision. And the final form of freedom is what I call and others call Republican freedom. Republican freedom is the freedom from potential domination by figures in unaccountable authority. A woman doesn't have freedom if she has to ask her partner or her parent if she can do X and Y, even if she knows that 99% of the time he or she would say yes. Republican freedom is when I can decide, and it's my decision, and nobody can tell me it isn't. These forms of freedom are vital. And in the recreation of a good society following the pandemic and all the ugliness that is taking place now, we need that. Now, in the third book that I wrote, which is called Battling 8 Giants, using an analogy with Beveridge's famous 1942 report, where he talked about 5 giants, I've said that a basic income is not a panacea. It is part of a progressive strategy for overcoming the threats of 8 giants. And those 8 giants are inequality, insecurity, debt, stress, precarity, the feeling that one is a supplicant, the fear of automation, and most importantly, the fear of extinction. Because I believe the ecological threats will be the decisive factor inducing millions more to come out in support of basic income. And we have been seeing that in the past 2 years. There are now majority support in opinion polls in numerous countries across the world, and pilots in many forms are supporting why we should have a basic income. But the 8th giant is one that we should fear, and every green and every person who's progressive should fear. And that is the fear of authoritarian populism, a form of neo-fascism which is creeping up. This decadent government that we have today is part of that corruption that is lingering with authoritarian instincts and a version of them and us, which we're seeing in our everyday experience. But it could go that way. And we need to have a vision, a narrative, which is offering people a chance of greater control over their lives, a greater sense of ecological balance, a greater sense of what I call commoning, shared activities. And I believe that a green left, and not just a green, but a blue one as well, because my latest book's on the blue commons, that we need that narrative to take shape, and it will reach a point, I believe, where suddenly we've passed a threshold of mass support, and everybody will say, it's obvious, we have to move in that direction. Thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Guy. That was a great overview, and I'm sure we're going to pull apart some of the things that you touched on there in the Q&A. But let's move ourselves on, I guess, for now. We're going to be handing over to our next speaker, Maeve Cohen, who's going to provide an overview, of universal basic services and their role in building a new economy. So Maeve is a project lead at the Social Guarantee, an organization dedicated to advancing the arguments for universal basic services. She co-founded the Student Society Rethinking Economics, dedicated to the teaching of pluralist approaches to economics, and has grown now into an international network of students and researchers. Maeve has also written about a feminist Green New Deal for the Women's Budget Group and the Women's Environmental Network. So over to you, Maeve.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it was a real pleasure listening to your talk, Guy. There's so much of it that I agree with. I'm going to share some slides because I like them. And I can't figure out how to do it. It's unbelievable how bad at this I am, even though we've been doing this for years now. Has that worked?
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay. So yes, I'm Maeve. As Johan says, I'm from an organisation called the Social Guarantee, and I am going to talk about universal basic services, but I'm going to do so by talking about the Social Guarantee. And this talk is sort of one of the reasons why we've moved on to the Social Guarantee. It grew out of universal basic services, but we wanted to reframe it because we found this sort of antagonism between UBS and UBI really unhelpful, and wanted far more to focus on our shared values, as Guy said, and pushing the project forward to create more resilient economies, a just transition, and all of the things that are really important. So I am going to talk about UBS, but I'm going to talk about it in the context of the Social Guarantee. What is the Social Guarantee? So basically, we know that there are fundamental things that absolutely everybody in society needs in order to be able to contribute to society, in order to be able to live fulfilling lives. And these are things like housing, things like healthcare, education. And what the social guarantee is all about is putting these things at the centre of all political and economic activity. So it's saying the point of our economies, the point of our political systems should be meeting these fundamental needs. And it should do this through the collective provision of services. So that's making sure everyone has access to things like public transport, to healthcare, and also by making sure that everybody has enough money so that they're able to pay for life's essentials. So yeah, that's in its core, it's all about meeting people's needs. So here is an example of the things that people need, and it's not an exhaustive list. I would think that it's all pretty self-explanatory. I will just comment on the internet because sometimes people bring that up. I think it's fair to say that in 2022 in Britain, the internet is essential. You need it for attending events like this, for example, but obviously to be educated, to get appointments at the doctors, and to do all these essential things. So we do see the internet as a fundamental need in this day and age. Some of these needs, some of the services that meet these needs are incredibly expensive. So that's things like education, healthcare, social care. It doesn't make them any less fundamental, any less essential that they're really expensive, but they are really expensive. And for these things, if we were trying to buy these things individually on our own, it would ruin most of us. So it makes a lot of sense for these things for us to collectively pool our resources and make sure that everyone has access to these things at either a really affordable price or free at the point of use when they need them. For other things, things like food and clothing, it doesn't really make sense for the state to send everybody uniforms or ration boxes. For these things, they're a lot more down to individual preferences, and people need to be able to buy these things themselves. For those things that are also just as essential, people need enough money to be able to access them. It should go without saying, it isn't on the slide, but I would hope that it's very obvious that none of these needs can be met in a planet that's burning. So making sure that we're meeting all of these needs within planetary boundaries is an absolutely essential part of the social guarantee. So yes, this is it in a nutshell. This is what the social guarantee is. It's universal services for those things that are too expensive for us to be able to buy on our own. And it's a living income to make sure people have enough money to be able to buy the things that they need. And when we talk about a living income, we talk about a real living wage. So the vast majority of people will get their living income through well-paid, sustainable, fulfilling, unionized jobs. And for those who can't work, we would advocate for a minimum income guarantee. And that's basically an income floor that nobody can fall below. We need to we figure out how much people to live on, and then make sure that absolutely everyone has that amount of money, regardless of circumstance. Yes, so needs are very varied. There are different needs. And so it makes sense that the things we do to meet these needs are very varied. So there'll be lots of different organizations delivering services to meet lots of different needs. So for example, if you've got a national rail service, it would make sense for the nation state to provide that service. However, if you've got a neighbourhood care service that goes into vulnerable people's houses and cares for them, probably doesn't make sense for a national state to provide that. It makes a lot more sense for a local organisation, a community group, a care cooperative to provide that service. So there's lots of different types of organisations delivering lots of different types of needs, services that meet these needs, sorry, but they would all need to adhere to these certain principles under the social guarantee. So I'll just, as quickly as I can, run through these principles. So first of all, access to life's essentials is an entitlement, right? That's the whole point of the social guarantee. We're talking about meeting people's needs, and everybody needs to have their needs met, and that is their right. Access is based on need, not ability to pay. So nobody should go out without a secure home, for example, just because they haven't got any money. People should have control over the services that they use, over their bus services, or over the care that they receive. And that means that we need to devolve power away from central government, as is we're living in an incredibly centralized state at the minute. We need to devolve power to local people and give them the right to decide over their local economies and how their lives go. And then different types of organizations will deliver services that meet different types of needs, but they all need to be held to certain standards. They all need to deliver services and adequate services and meet certain environmental and ethical standards. Obviously, we want these services to be co-created with ordinary people, with professionals, and with experts, and they should all be included in the design and the delivery of services. We need fair pay, we need secure working conditions, we need good unionized jobs and high quality training and development opportunities. There needs to be very clear rules for establishing and enforcing entitlements. So basically, if you're in an area and there's no adequate childcare provision, for example, then it is up to the state to come and ensure that there is adequate childcare by either providing that themselves or providing the investment to enable local people to be able to deliver that service locally. And then finally, and most importantly, these services must be sustainable and promote sufficiency within planetary boundaries. So yes, as I say, none of the needs can be met within a planet that's burning. That is at the heart of everything that the social guarantee is advocating for. So to talk about some of the benefits of the social guarantee, which obviously there are many, the first one being equality. So low-income people depend on services more than high-income people. So when you invest in public services, it disproportionately benefits people on low incomes. So this, combined with a minimum income guarantee, good quality services and a minimum income guarantee, will go a long way towards eradicating poverty. Obviously, the most important one for this particular meeting and just in general is sustainability. So meeting people's needs through the collective provision of services is more sustainable for several reasons. So firstly, on a sort of philosophical level, as I say, putting people's needs at the centre of economic activity rather than profit accumulation at the centre of economic activity is what we need to do if we're going to transition to a low carbon economy. We need to change the point of the economy away from generating profit, away from infinite growth, and towards meeting people's needs. That's what we need during the transition and for the economy after the transition. On a more practical level, public services are less carbon intensive. So a very obvious example of this would be a public transport system that everybody can use, that's an adequate public transport system, is vastly more environmentally sustainable than everybody else having their own individual cars. Similarly, with a collectively provided health service, we know that the health services in Europe, the publicly owned health services, are vastly more low carbon than the private equivalent in the US. So yes, when we talk about a just transition, and I'm sure that the Green New Deal Rising people spoke to you about this last week, often when people are talking about decarbonising the economy, they're talking about electric vehicles, they're talking about renewable energy. And what can often be overlooked is the already low carbon and really important sectors that enable us all to thrive. And that's things like the caring industries, that's things like education, that's things like healthcare. So when we're moving towards a low carbon economy, it's not just about decarbonising these labour-intensive industries. It's all about investing in these low-carbon essential industries as well, as Guy was saying. So, yeah, sustainability is collectively providing services are much more sustainable than their private alternatives. And just to do a little name drop, Kate Rayworth spoke at our launch event last year, and she talked about the social guarantee as being the centre of the donut. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with donut economics. And it's the middle of the donut is the social foundation for society, and the outer ring of the donut is the planetary boundaries. And we need to be sitting in this middle bit. So everybody needs to have their essential needs met within our planetary boundaries. And that's exactly what the social guarantee is trying to do. We are the social pillar of a Green New Deal. Collectively provided services are also more efficient. I'll go again to the sort of healthcare example. We know that the NHS is a lot more efficient than the private equivalents in the US. It costs a lot less money to run, and it's also a lot more environmentally sustainable. And then very importantly, it's about solidarity. So ensuring that everybody's needs are met is about society as a whole saying that we will not let people fall below a certain standard of living. And it's not about creating a safety net that you can punch holes in. It's about laying a solid foundation upon which everybody can build a successful and a fulfilling life. I've talked a bit about different needs and different service providers and all of that. I want to make sure that I make very clear that there's an important role for the state in all of this, not only as a direct provider of services, but also for these reasons. So firstly, it's up to the state to guarantee equality of access. And that's through, as I'm saying, if there's holes in services, it's up to the state to go in and deliver them or enable them to be delivered. But also it's about ensuring that if you are in Bradford, your services are as good as if you were in Kensington, and ensuring that that equality exists across the economy. It's up to the state to set and enforce standards through democratic means. So that's ethical standards, environmental standards, employment standards. It's obviously up to the state to collect, invest and distribute funds through taxation and borrowing, and obviously ensure that these funds are equitably distributed so that everybody has access. And then also to coordinate activity and communication between sectors, between regions, to make sure that this is not a system based on competition, but a system based on cooperation and sharing and supporting each other. And yeah, I mean, that's it from me. I really look forward to the discussion. I know that we've talked about our individual things. I'm looking forward to seeing what the similarities and differences are between them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Maeve. That was brilliant. That was a really good oversight. You almost kind of stole my first question, because I guess my initial reaction is that I would be interested to hear what both of you have to say almost about the other presentation. So I guess as we've just heard from you, Maeve, I'll start with Guy. Do you see basic income as one element of a just approach to the economy, and where would a social guarantee or universal basic services potentially fit in your mind? You're on mute at the moment.
Sorry. Well, thank you very much, Maeve, for the presentation. I'm glad you put it in terms of a social guarantee, because I've never understood what the hell universal basic services means. And I've read all the reports and documents that have been produced on it. And I cannot, for the sake of my mind, think, for example, that having a universal basic bus service is somehow a universal transport service, because it discriminates against those who take tubes, those who take bicycles, those who walk, etc. But that's what they presented in the first round of the proposal. So I think you're wise to move it away from that to a social guarantee. What I would like to ask you as a first sortie into it is, if you try to move to a lower level of abstraction from your things, I'm not a paternalist. I don't believe I can define your needs or Johan's needs or anybody else in our group, their needs, their priorities, their particular needs. What I do believe in is trying to move to a situation where you have the ability to pursue what you define as your needs. So we start from a less paternalistic position. I worked in the Soviet Union for a while, and I saw what happens with a state when it defines everybody's needs and guarantees to provide them. And they were terrible. Same in China. the rice bowl situation, which was a terrible situation where the state said, I'm going to supply your needs and you better put up with them. But I don't want to go in that rhetorical way particularly, because I want you, in a sense, to think of an ecological future. An ecological future in which we are not all consumed by a need to be in a job. Job. Everything's got to be jobs. Now, if you say everything has to be in jobs, then jobs are resource depleting. They cannot get away from the fact that they are ecologically diminishing in most respects. And if you put jobs up on a pinnacle and you say you've got to have full employment with everybody in jobs, then you're ecologically in trouble for a start. Now, what you say on the left-hand side, or if left-hand side looking at it, was that you have a living income, right? Living income. And you define a living income as a living wage and a guaranteed minimum income, right? Now, I know what guaranteed minimum income means in practice, because there are thousands of studies of that subject. It means a means-tested base for providing a minimum, okay? And you get it up to that minimum. It's a means-tested system. And you cannot have a means-tested system without huge exclusion errors, huge poverty trap problems, and huge behavioral conditionalities coming in very quickly after that. At least in that sense, universal credit is intellectually honest, because it basically says that somebody may be poor because they choose to be poor. I don't believe many do that, but that's what they say. And therefore, we have to have behavior tests to determine whether they are deserving or undeserving of their minimum income. You can't get away from it if you go down to a means testing system. And I don't like the term because it means we are still moving into a paternalistic system where bureaucrats decide who is deserving and who is not. As for a living wage, most of the group that I write about, Prokaryote, they're not protected by the minimum wage, nor by the living wage. They don't have adequate access to the type of jobs that are unionized and of the traditional old type. Today and in the future, we're going to have a totally different labor process in which much of the labor and work is done online, not in jobs for which you can have a fixed wage. That's the industrial model of Fordism. Today, we're in a totally different reality. So I don't think those instruments are going to give the income security that you and I would want. I'm trying to tease you to being more libertarian in one sense, but more green. We want to encourage people to do many forms of work that are not jobs and that never will be jobs. And I don't want to be in a job. I've never worked harder than when I ceased having a job. But my income security and my creativity, or whatever it is, comes through interacting with nature, with volunteering, with commoning. And that is what we need to encourage. And I don't see it in a paternalistic model that we're encouraging this new type of green lifestyle. And that's what we should be doing. Sorry if I've been a bit long.
That's
No,
okay.
that's
Yes. Okay, I'm going to try and there's several points that you've made. So I think the first one on what do people need? I think there's a difference between subjective preferences and objective needs. There are things that we fundamentally need. We need a secure home, for example. What we mean by things that we need is things that will be objectively harmful to you if they aren't there. So if you don't have a house, it will objectively damage your life. If you don't have an education, it will objectively damage your life. If you don't have access to healthcare. So there are certain things that aren't subjective preferences, they are objective needs, and they can be defined by they're plural, so they can't replace each other. So if I have loads and loads of education but no healthcare, doesn't matter how much education I have, I need the healthcare as well. And they are satiable. You can have enough healthcare, you can have enough houses, you only need one. But it's not the same thing as a subjective preference and objective needs. And we're not saying, in fact, we're fundamentally moving away from an economy that works along the lines of subjective preferences to one that moves towards what people need. Or when I've done work with the Women's Budget Group, and they talk about care at the centre of what we do. And I think care being at the centre of our economy is absolutely what we need to be green. With regards to jobs, yes, we should be working less. Absolutely, I agree with you. And yes, we should recognise the unpaid labour, the way that we undervalue essential work. I don't think the answer to that is giving people money. I don't think that's the way that we answer that. I think that we start paying. These jobs are jobs that people do. The caring economy, the caring industries do exist. We need to be expanding these industries and recognizing that they're essential. Yes, lots of work will move online, but there's lots of work that exists in every single neighborhood, in every single town, all over the world. Things like driving buses, cleaning streets, looking after people, working in shops that provide food. These jobs aren't going online. They're not going anywhere. These are part of the everyday economy on which we all depend. And yes, we should be valuing them more, and we should be providing people good unionized jobs in those areas. And I think the way to address the precariat is first off providing good sustainable jobs, because not all jobs deplete the environment. Some jobs are very good for the environment. We should be making more of these jobs, expanding these areas of the economy, opening them up to more people, and enabling people to work. And if you can't work for whatever reason, you are still protected. And I'd like to sort of reframe, if I will, the idea of these services. Another way of looking at it is it's a social wage. Low-income people spend vastly more of their money on these essential services. If these were free or very affordable, that would put money directly back in the pockets of low-income people. So it's a sort of in-kind benefit, an in-kind wage. And we think that that's vastly more sustainable than giving people money, particularly at a time where we really need to reduce consumption. We really need to reduce consumption. We feel like the market is one of the, if not the cause of the ecological crisis we face, this dependency on markets. If we can move to a system that is more in kind, like you were saying about the commons, if we can re-own the commons, if we can re-own these things that we all depend on, collectively own them and ensure that everyone has access to them, not through markets, but through in-kind benefits, I think that that's a much greener way to approach the problem. And then the final thing on means testing, I agree with you. The means testing system is punitive. It's horrific. But the answer to that is not to just get rid of it and give everybody an income, in our opinion. The answer to that is to make it better, is to improve the means testing system, to make it less punitive, to make it more understanding. I don't think you need to give everybody money because the current system is not fit for purpose.
Thanks for that, Maeve. I think we're already starting to pull apart some really interesting discussions, some disagreements, and lots where we're I think building on each other. Guy, I wonder if you had any, I guess, immediate reaction to that. I assume, obviously, as a basic income advocate, you would disagree with the means testing question and see benefits in the universalism aspect of it, even if it's not part of the name. You're on mute.
No, I don't want us to repeat what we've just dialogued. Clearly, we do have a difference of view. I believe in giving people the freedom to make decisions themselves, and I don't like the state paternalism, and I don't think means testing is rescuable by saying we're going to be nicer I think the contradictions of means testing and behavior testing will always persist. In every single country where means testing has been done, including Scandinavia, where they're very nice and very all that. I've worked in Scandinavia. They fail with huge exclusion errors, huge poverty traps. You can't get around the poverty trap problem that exists with means testing, as this government is finding out. But I don't think that to repeat what Maeve and I have just been saying would be particularly useful. We have our positions on this. I think we're talking about two different visions of what a good society should look like. I want to move away from jobs. I want to move to a position where we encourage people to produce locally, to produce and consume locally, and to produce more. There's nothing wrong with producing more of goods that are useful for people, food and so on, and to decommodify ourselves and move away from the social democratic model that has prevailed over the past century. And I think that this is where the green left, blue-green left, I would prefer to call it, is going to be moving. It's an emancipatory agenda, which looks at a different way of living and a different way of rewarding things. I don't like, for example, the term care industry that Maeve used. I hate that term. Care shouldn't be regarded as an industry. It isn't an industry, and it should never be considered. And once you use the language care industry, I don't relate to that. Care is something that is part and parcel of living. We want to encourage an environment where all of us are care providers, men and just as much as women, and more of us recognize that we should be caring for the environment and caring for ourselves and caring for our community. But I think this sort of social democratic model of jobs will never get us that direction. And if we're green and radical, then that is the way our minds should be thinking, which is a more emancipatory mind and much more exciting, but risky. But I think that discourse is really a matter for the young Greens to be taking forward, because the young Greens and the other young people in the Prokaryote are going to be defining what we mean by work, what we mean by our living standards, and what we have as needs. Of course, we all want homes. Of course, we all want education. Of course, we all want healthcare. Of course, we all want these things. This is obvious, but it's not an agenda. It's not an agenda. It's not a narrative. And the narrative means a way of living, a way of living. And that is what Greens should be about. In a sense, I'm not arguing with Maeve, I'm arguing with social democrats.
I would just like to say that we don't want healthcare and education, and we need them. We don't want them. We need them. They're essential. But with regard to the sort of mean testing question, I think a really important question about UBI with regard to this is who gives out the basic income, right? Presumably it's the state that would deliver the basic income. It's one lever that the state can use or not use. As we can see with the absolute turmoil that's going on in Westminster, not all governments are good governments. If you've got a network of different services that provide different things and they're owned and shared by different people, it's a lot harder to break that up. You can see for decades we've been trying to privatize the NHS and it's still somewhat intact because it's next to impossible to do that. A couple of months ago, they took away £20 worth of universal credit like that. It's just one thing that they did, and any sort of nefarious government could come in and have that much impact over people's lives, I think is a really dangerous game. And if the alternative to that is some means testing, then I am all for that. And I think that we need to, when you're talking about a vision and a different way of looking at the economy, that's exactly what I'm saying. We need to change. The economy is currently about profit accumulation and markets. We need to move away from profit accumulation and markets and focus on needs. And whether or not the term caring industries is a good one or not, the fact is that people will have to care for people and be paid for it. Like, my mum has Alzheimer's. I can't look after her. She is in a care home, and that is necessary. Like, and that will probably be the case for a long, long time. There are people that are going to have work caring for people, and there always has been. And I think, yeah, and maybe the term's not very good. I agree with you. I don't really like the term. It was shorthand for whatever it is. But yeah, I think that the means testing point, that's the lesser of two evils, in my opinion. And it is about reforming the economy entirely. It's about changing the point of it from profit generation to meeting needs.
Yeah, I think I'm just to jump in here, because I think there's it's really, really interesting discussion, but there's a couple of sort of questions that have come through that might delve into some different elements of what both of you have said. And I think actually it was touched on initially there by Maeve just now, around the payment of the basic income. And we've had the question, Guy, which I'm sure you've answered hundreds of times in every call about UBI, but you know, we often hear about financing something like a UBI and how would it be possible? Surely that's not something that would be practical. And then I guess in response, actually, Maeve, I assume actually talking about social provisioning on a scale that's bigger than we currently see, you must also be getting those kinds of questions. So starting with you, Guy, how would you finance the UBI? And then we'll come to Maeve around that same question.
Well, in my talk, I said how I would finance a basic income, but I did it in a short form. So let me just elaborate on that. I believe that we must establish an independent commons capital fund made up of eco taxes and taxes on interests that have deprived us of the commons. That independent fund would be modeled on the Norwegian pension fund, which did that with the oil proceeds from the North Sea oil. And today it is the biggest sovereign wealth fund in the world. And it's independent of government, so that it's an institutional mechanism for collecting rental income from people and interests and corporations who are depriving us of our commons. And as you build it up, you can recycle the revenue that fund is building in the form of basic income payments or dividends. That is why I say that with carbon taxes, we need a high carbon tax. We need £100 a week or whatever, £100 cubic ton of carbon rather. And that would fund part of a payment of a basic income. You'd have to have an independent policy committee to do it, so it could not be politicized by the party in power at the time, but it would try to avoid a capture by the rentiers. What we need is a strategy of dismantling rentier capitalism. Maeve, it's not profits that are being earned, it's rents that are being earned from property ownership, okay? We have a system which is giving vast income to people who've never produced a thing, okay? They are making billions in terms of rents from owning property. We need to tackle that and get the recycling of the rentier income in the form that I'm talking about and other forms, not just paying a basic income. We don't need means-tested systems. We don't need behavior-tested systems of social protection. If we recycle the rents, we can actually get a better income distribution system altogether, more freedom of people to choose what type of work they do, whether they take low-wage jobs and other activities because they're receiving part of their income. And we want less fear of automation. There's nothing wrong with automation. Automation may be ecologically fantastic, but at the moment, It's fears among the trade union people and other people that it's going to displace jobs. Well, as long as we have a focus on jobs, well, we're going to be in that trap. But actually, it would be great if we automated many of the dirtiest, nastiest jobs that we've got people are having to do at the moment, and certainly many of the ecologically destructive jobs. So for me, it's a matter of giving more freedom, more security, and therefore better health and a better attitude to nature. But this is a different way of looking at things from the old social democratic model. That's a different way of looking at it. And I think that the Greens internationally are moving in that direction.
Go on, Maeve. How do you? I don't know if there's anything you wanted to pick up there, but similarly with the sort of financing question around, you know, expanding the social guarantee.
Well, yeah, I mean, exactly what Guy says. Wealth taxes, carbon taxes, alongside. I mean, it's not that expensive, and you don't even need this. These people are so wealthy, you don't even need to tax them that much. There's an insane amount of money. The lack of money in circulation is not the problem. It's where that money is distributed. And I absolutely agree with so much of what you're saying, Guy. And I resent you framing the social guarantee as the old social democratic system. That is not what we're talking about at all. We're talking about completely reforming what the point of our societies are for, back to a thing of caring for one another. And one of the things that I think we're not talking about here is when you've got the money to buy the things that you need, when you've got your money from your basic income, where are you spending that? You're spending it in markets where people are having to work with their jobs to buy the things that everybody wants. When you were talking about, I think you talked about Republican freedom, and I think that you were, in fact, I won't say that because I don't remember exactly what the frame was. But basically, when we're talking about ownership, when we're talking about who owns what in society, and we're talking about rentier capitalism, I'm not sure how giving people money does anything to change who owns what. What we're talking about is recommoning all these public assets. So I think maybe a good example of this would be what happened with housing in the UK, right? So we had all this social housing. Everybody, vulnerable people who needed housing got social houses. They accessed this collectively provided service. When Thatcher came in, created the rent that they helped to buy, sold off all this social housing, and it turned into housing benefits. People were given the cash that they needed to buy this service from the private rental sector. That drove up house prices, it drove down the conditions of renting, and it made people more precarious. Collectively providing housing was a much better way to ensure security for people on low income and vulnerable people than giving people money so they could buy that service themselves in private markets. And I'm not sure how UBI or UBI addresses that problem of ownership in the economy and depending on markets to the extent that we do.
Go for it, Guy.
No, I don't want to repeat things. I think that in a market society, you can't live without money. And money enables you to have a greater sense of control over your time. It reduces your stress, and it allows you to make better decisions. And these are critical. What surveys and pilots in which I've been involved show is that when people have a basic income, they tend to spend their money on their basic needs. They tend to spend it on childcare, on their health care. They also give themselves a better chance of spending more time in doing unpaid, non-job activities that are beneficial for the community, beneficial for their families, and beneficial for the economy in the longer term. That's why I don't like the term care industry. I think we need to actually encourage all of us, particularly men, to spend more time doing care work, unpaid care work, proudly unpaid, but is a sense that it is belonging to a community. One of the wonderful things that we've seen in some of our pilots is that when people have basic income, they are more cooperative and indulge in cooperative activities of sharing, which are beneficial for the local community. If they didn't have that money, they couldn't do that. And this encourages a localism, encourages a different way of life, of living. And this, I think, is what we should be doing. And that is why we need basic income. But to say we don't need money, which is just, you know, I don't get that. I mean, I quoted you down. You don't believe work should be helped by giving people money. That's what the exact sentence you said. Exact sentence you
Sorry,
said.
say that sentence again. What did I say?
You don't believe work should be helped by giving people money. That's what you said. And
Well, obviously,
I wrote
that's
it down
not a
in
great
shorthand.
sentence.
I
What
wrote
did I
it
mean by
shorthand when
that?
you said it. But I'm sure I hope you didn't mean it.
I
But
don't know
think
what,
people
it
do
doesn't
need
make
money.
sense to me, that sentence.
I know it didn't make sense to me
Okay.
when I heard you say it, but let us say that actually money does help. And I think that we need to make sure, and here I want us to get to a consensus, because of course we need good public services. The sort of services that you are talking about in your social guarantee, 100% support. I think we don't need privatization, we need deprivatization, particularly of the NHS and our social housing. Those are fundamental, and our education system, all of which have been commodified, horribly privatized in the past 25 years or more. So I think we need public services, but we also need people to have basic security. And unless you have a basic income, you don't have basic security. That is the pendant. And therefore, to say that money is not important when it
In fairness, Guy, I didn't say that. In fact, when I showed you the diagram at the start of this whole conversation, I said
my shorthand is very clear. My shorthand is very clear.
Okay, well, I said we absolutely, I can show you the drawing again. We need the universal services and we need a living income. I know absolutely
you said, but then when you said a living income, you said a living income, but then later on when you were disparaging basic income, you were saying that money is not important, and various other sentences.
I don't think I did say
okay,
that.
let us agree there.
Well, if I did say that, Guy,
I must have misheard what you said.
If I did say that, then I apologize. I never meant that.
So then I'm very pleased to agree on that, because I don't think we should waste our time on semantics. I'm glad to hear you say that. So if I misheard you, apologies. If you missaid it, apologies. We forget that. I think what we need is a strategy in which none of these approaches by themselves are a panacea. I think we are in a very transformational moment when the old politics of the Conservatives, the Social Democrats, the trade unionists are out of date, okay? And we have to actually look for new institutions, new mechanisms, which are ecologically oriented. And that is why, for example, to be honest, been a trade union member all my life, but I'm very critical of trade union positions on many of these issues because they are still stuck in a mold of the past. But the essence of what we should be discussing is building a new lifestyle in the context of the years after the pandemic and after we've got rid of this disgusting government that we've got at the moment. And at the moment, we're not seeing it from the Labour Party. We're not seeing it from the Lib Dems, and the Greens have a great opportunity to forge a new vision and narrative. But it must be a narrative that is different from the old Social Democrats. That's my feeling.
I agree. We
Good,
spoke.
Good. In that case, we have a good point on which to go off and have my dinner, because I'm late for my dinner.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that we're coming to an end, and actually I think that was a good summary actually, in that whilst obviously there's I guess creative differences in some of these approaches, I think actually there is a lot of common ground that can be had, and hopefully this is the start of a conversation on this side of of forging a sort of a new progressive politics. I guess I have one final question for the both of you. It's kind of a sort of looking ahead kind of a question, just to round up. And I apologize to those of you who sent me questions and I've not been able to get around to it, but the conversation has been really, really fascinating. So I wanted to sort of to let it run. But the final question, I guess, is, I think both of you have touched upon this to a degree, that over coming decades, we're going to be seeing issues from, climate change, automation, Guy, you mentioned, things like demographic aging, etc., kind of dominate political discussion. And these are the kinds of questions that often lead to an answer that leads its way to a basic income or to a wider social guarantee. So in some ways, do you think that the winning of a social guarantee or a universal basic income is almost inevitable? Do you think that's something that's going to be coming down the line? It's just obviously for progressives such as ourselves to be pushing it in that direction. I guess I'll start with Maeve on this one and then hand over to Guy.
I mean, I hope so, but I'm doubtful. More likely, I think, is like authoritarian neoliberalism or eco-fascism. But fingers crossed, I'm doing everything I can in my power to make sure that that's not the case. I would very much like Guy was saying, we are at this point in history where the old order is dying and we don't know what's going to come next. And I am pushing with all of my energy in the direction of a social guarantee, of a feminist Green New Deal, of these sorts of refiguring of society and re-evaluating what the point of being alive is and what humans need. Yeah, and I'm hopeful that those things will happen, but it's looking pretty bleak, if I'm honest.
Yeah, definitely. I know there is obviously a huge flip side to this discussion, but we're trying to end with some optimism. Over to you, Guy.
Well, actually, just because Maeve said the negative, and I fully agree with what she was saying, so I'm not disagreeing. Let me emphasize some positive issues, which is that first and foremost, we have a new class structure that's taken shape over the last couple of decades. And the major new class is the Prokaryote. And I get invited to talk to the Prokaryote all over the world. I mean, it's incredible. My book on the Prokaryote's been translated into 25 languages. And every single day I get things about the Prokaryote. I believe people in the Prokaryote, increasingly made up of young, educated people. They're not looking to a return to the old normal, the old full-time jobs and all of that. They're looking for this sort of more creative, emancipatory future. And I believe the energy out there will come to the fore once we get the pandemic under control. So we've all been sheltered from expressing ourselves and putting our energies out there. I think there's a very strong possibility that we can have a drift to neo-fascist populism. I think there is that risk, but that makes it even more important that we mobilize and articulate a new utopia, if you like. And that utopia may never come about, but we must have a vision of what we would like as a good society, how ecological it could be. And all of the rescuing of the sea, rescuing of the commons, means that I think we should be putting a huge focus on how we revive our commons, revive the commons, which means putting it in a different language. When I listen to the donut stuff, I get completely confused and lost. It's all words, all abstractions and things like that. And I've seen Kate doing it with her bloody ball and in the air and tossing it up. And I said, God knows, this is not going to get the left out of this crisis. We need a vision which is really less abstract and more geared to what an ecological future would look like. And then we can build to it. So I'm not too pessimistic. On a Monday or a Friday, I might be very pessimistic. But I think there are elements out there, and there's fantastic energy. There's fantastic energy out there. You're showing it, and there are huge numbers all over the place who've got that energy and anger, and that's great. And I hope we all share that, because it's up to us to try and articulate a new vision. Yes, we can have our disagreements on this or that or the rest of it, but we must try and move away from the old models. So thank you very much for listening. I hope it's been useful.
Brilliant.
And
Thanks very much,
Maeve, for the discussion.
Thank you too. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, really, really great discussion. Really good to hear. Really good to hear some, the discussion, the debate, and where we're coming together as well. I think it definitely is a really good point to emphasize that, whilst the old order crumbles, it's kind of the ideas that lie around that are the ones that are picked up. And, we've got plenty of ideas now, which is really exciting. So hopefully we could be making something out of it in the coming years. Before I let everybody go, we are just going to have a couple of announcements about the kinds of activities that are going on over the next few months amongst the Young Greens, because it's not only an exciting time in terms of these discussions, but it's also a really exciting time in the Young Greens with what we have going on at the moment. So one thing that we do have going on is obviously the rest of this political education series, which we'll be talking about in a moment, but we're also gearing up for the May elections, and we have our flagship training program, 30 Under 30, back. We had a year's hiatus because of COVID, but we are going to be back very shortly. So just briefly, 30 Under 30 is a unique opportunity to gain a sort of immersive residential experience into all things Green Party and Young Greens. The scheme has really helped shape some of our most high-profile organisers and activists, including 2/3 of our current Green Party leadership team, with Carla Denyer and Amelia Womack both being 30 Under 30 alumni. COVID permitting, this year we are hoping to head to Cardiff. We've made a couple of weekends available in March and early April in case we need to readjust to an online version. It will include sessions on green politics, campaigns, elections, and much, much more. The programme is really about gaining the confidence, the inspiration and skills to organise in your local area, on your campus, or within your student or trade union. Accommodation and food are fully paid for, and the travel is heavily subsidised. So all you need is a commitment to get stuck in and a dedication to building a dynamic green youth movement. We do really hope, though, that this can help champion diversity within our movement. So we would particularly encourage women, LGBTIQA+, disabled, BAME and working class members to attend or to apply, sorry. All you need to be is a Green Party member aged 18 to 29 or a full or part-time student, and you are eligible. Applications close on Thursday, the 3rd of February, so get them in soon. It literally takes 10 minutes, so just we'll drop the link in the chat for you now. There's no sort of minimum experience or qualification needed. Put yourself forward and hopefully you can be part of that group. So as I said, tonight was the third of 6 political education sessions in the Pillars of Green Politics series, and there is no let up. We have another session coming next week. We're going to be joined next week on Tuesday. We'll be holding a talk and Q&A with Jason Hickel on an economy beyond growth. Jason is a professor at the Autonomous University of Barcelona and a fantastic author who communicates his work in a really accessible way. The talk will build on the discussion tonight, as both UBI and UBS have been posited as key platforms within a post-growth economy, whilst also returning to a focus on tackling the climate emergency at the scale set out by the science. So to make sure that you don't miss out, you can sign up for the session right now. We will share the link in the chat for you so that you can RSVP straight away. And please share that link with anyone who you think might be interested. They don't have to be in the Young Greens. They don't have to be in the Green Party even, but just share that link so that we can help spread the word. We would also really appreciate it if you could share your thoughts about tonight's panel, and it's been really, really fascinating. So we really want to get as many people along to the rest of our series. So our click to tweet is going to be shared in the chat, and you can easily communicate how great the session was that way. Sharing your thoughts is really helpful. It helps get the message out there so we can attract new people and continue to build this movement for social and environmental justice. And the very last thing I would say is, If you enjoyed tonight and you think that political education is useful and want to hear more from the Young Greens, then please consider supporting us with a regular gift. Even just the price of a cup of coffee once a month shows your support and helps us build so that we can continue to put on more great events, we can support our campaigns and election activities so that we can help build the political transformation that we wish to see. So we are going to share the link in the chat as well for you to make a donation if you'd be able to, and we'd really appreciate any kind support that you could give. Right. Before we leave you, I just want to say a final big thank you to both guests, Zoom reactions, actual reactions. It's been a great discussion. I've really enjoyed it and I've learned a lot, so I need to go and do some thinking. But yes, I will now leave you all to get back to your evenings, get back, enjoy your dinner, and hopefully we can see you next week at our next session. Thanks, everybody.